The accident had changed everything. 3 months ago, Alexander Hayes had been standing at the top of the corporate world. Now, he sat in a wheelchair, staring out the windows of his penthouse office at Hayes Industries. The city sprawled below him like a kingdom he could no longer rule on his own terms. His assistant knocked softly before entering. Margaret had been with him for 15 years, but even she seemed different now, her voice carrying a careful gentleness that made his jaw clench. The physical therapy session had been brutal. Dr. Richardson remained optimistic about partial recovery, but Alexander had learned to read between the lines. The damage to his spinal cord was extensive. The man who had once climbed mountains might never walk again. Alexander had clawed his way up from poverty, turning a small tech startup into a multinational corporation through sheer will. He'd never needed anyone, never wanted to be seen as anything less than invincible. The thought of pity made his stomach turn. That's when she walked in, and everything changed again. Maya Chen had researched Alexander Hayes extensively before this interview, but nothing prepared her for meeting him. The photographs showed a tall, commanding figure with piercing grey eyes. The man before her now sat in a wheelchair, but those same eyes held an intensity that made her breath catch. She'd been hired as his personal care coordinator, a position that paid 3 times her previous salary. Maya needed this job desperately. Her younger brother's medical bills were crushing her family. "Ms. Chen, I assume you've read the job description." Maya nodded, maintaining steady eye contact despite his scrutiny. She'd dealt with difficult patients before, though none quite like this. Alexander Hayes was legendary for his perfectionism. The previous 3 coordinators had lasted 2 weeks each. "I'm not looking for a nursemaid. I need someone who can help me maintain my independence while I adapt to new circumstances. Can you handle that?" There was challenge in his voice, as if he expected her to flinch or offer patronizing reassurance. Instead, Maya straightened her shoulders. "Mr. Hayes, I'm not here to coddle you. I'm here to help you optimize your capabilities and work around your limitations. There's a difference." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or the faintest hint of approval. She got the job. Maya's first week at the Hayes penthouse was an exercise in navigating uncharted territory. The apartment was a marvel of modern design and accessibility technology, clearly modified after Alexander's accident with unlimited resources. Alexander's daily routine was rigorous and precisely timed. Physical therapy at 6 a.m., followed by video conferences with international offices, reviewing financial reports, coordinating with his executive team. Maya quickly learned that his mind remained sharp, even if his body had betrayed him. He was also impossible to please. The first coordinator had been fired for hovering, the second for being too familiar, the third for showing up 2 minutes late. Maya began to understand that Alexander's exacting standards were his way of maintaining control in a life that had spiraled beyond his grasp. She adapted quickly, learning to anticipate his needs without being asked, staying close enough to assist, but far enough to preserve his dignity. Most importantly, she learned to read his moods, understanding when he needed space and when he needed distraction. The breakthrough came during his 3rd physical therapy session. Alexander was pushing himself harder than recommended, sweat beading on his forehead as he struggled with exercises designed to maintain muscle tone. Maya watched from across the room, seeing frustration building in his shoulders. When the session ended, Alexander remained staring at his motionless legs with raw anguish. Maya moved quietly to his side, not speaking, simply present. Sometimes the strongest people needed someone to witness their vulnerability without trying to fix it. The board meeting was a disaster waiting to happen. Maya could see it in Alexander's posture as he prepared for the video conference, the rigid set of his jaw and the way his hands gripped the wheelchair's armrests. Hayes Industries' stock had been declining since news of his accident became public. She positioned herself outside the camera's range, close enough to assist if needed, but invisible to the dozen faces on the massive screen. The meeting began cordially with quarterly reports, but Maya felt tension building. Then Gregory Walsh, Alexander's oldest rival on the board, made his move. "Alexander, we need to discuss the elephant in the room. The investors are concerned about leadership stability. Perhaps it's time to consider transitioning to a more suitable arrangement." The silence was deafening. Maya watched Alexander's face become a mask of controlled fury. "Are you questioning my mental capacity, Gregory? Of course not, but the physical demands of this position, the travel requirements, stop. If you have concerns about my performance, address them directly. Don't hide behind euphemisms about my disability." The confrontation escalated quickly, with board members choosing sides. Maya watched Alexander fight for respect he'd never had to earn before, and she felt something shift inside her chest. This wasn't the arrogant billionaire from magazines. This was a man fighting to prove his worth all over again. When the meeting ended, Alexander sat motionless, staring at the blank screen. "They're afraid," Maya said softly. He looked up, surprised. "They've built careers on your strength. Now they don't know how to follow someone they see as vulnerable." Maya discovered Alexander's secret at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. Unable to sleep due to her brother's latest hospital admission, she'd come down for tea when she heard music drifting from the living room. She found Alexander at his grand piano, playing a haunting melody that poured directly from his soul. His fingers moved across keys with the same precision he brought to everything else. But there was something different here. The corporate mask had fallen away, leaving only raw emotion. Maya stood transfixed in the doorway, afraid to break the spell. The piece ended, and Alexander noticed her presence. Instead of sharp dismissal, he simply gestured to the bench beside him. "I didn't know you played," Maya said, settling carefully. "My mother's doing. She insisted on lessons even when we could barely afford food, said music would feed my soul when nothing else could." It was the first personal detail he'd shared, and Maya treasured it like a gift. She told him about her brother's condition, about financial pressure that had driven her to take this job, about dreams put on hold. They talked until dawn, sharing stories and discovering unexpected common ground. Both had clawed up from difficult beginnings. Both carried responsibility for others. Both had learned to hide vulnerabilities behind professional competence. As the sun rose, Alexander played another piece, lighter and more hopeful. Maya hummed along, and for the first time since his accident, Alexander smiled genuinely. The connection between them was becoming something neither had anticipated, something that made Maya's professional boundaries feel increasingly fragile. Chapter 6. The Revelation. The charity gala was Alexander's first public appearance since the accident. Maya watched from the wings as he navigated the crowded ballroom, every eye tracking his movement with curiosity, pity, and speculation. The Hayes Foundation's annual fundraiser for spinal cord research had taken on new significance. Alexander moved through the crowd with practiced grace, his custom tuxedo and confident demeanor challenging every assumption about disability and success. Maya felt pride watching him command the room from his wheelchair, proving that strength came in many forms. The evening was smooth until the incident with James Morrison, a pharmaceutical executive with old grudges. Maya watched Morrison's deliberately positioned chair block Alexander's path and the cruel smile accompanying his fake apology. "So sorry, Hayes. Didn't see you down there." The humiliation was calculated and public, designed to diminish Alexander before the city's elite. Maya saw something crack in Alexander's composure, and before she could think, she was moving. "Mr. Morrison, I believe your wife was looking for you. Something about the auction bid you promised her?" Her intervention was subtle but effective, redirecting social current and allowing Alexander to move past without confrontation. As they escaped to a quieter corner, Alexander's gratitude was evident. "Thank you. That was skillfully done." Maya realized how much she'd come to care about protecting not just his physical well-being, but his dignity. The professional distance she'd tried to maintain was crumbling, and she wasn't sure she wanted to rebuild it. Chapter 7. Crossing Lines. The kiss happened on a rainy Thursday evening in Alexander's study. Maya had been helping him review architectural plans for a new, accessible research facility when their hands brushed, reaching for the same document. The simple contact sent electricity through both of them, and suddenly they were looking at each other with awareness that went far beyond professional courtesy. "Maya," Alexander said softly, his voice carrying warning and plea equally. She should have stepped back. Every professional instinct screamed this was dangerous territory, that mixing personal feelings with career was a mistake she couldn't afford. Instead, she found herself leaning closer, drawn by vulnerability beneath his strength. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid of breaking something precious. Then Alexander's hand tangled in her hair, and Maya forgot every reason why this was terrible. In that moment, there was only the connection between them, intense and undeniable. When they broke apart, reality crashed back. Maya saw conflict in Alexander's eyes, the same war between desire and duty raging in her heart. "This complicates things," he said finally. Maya nodded, knowing he was right, but unable to regret what had happened. The line between them had been crossed, and there was no going back. Everything would be different now, charged with possibilities and fraught with new dangers. That night, Maya lay awake, staring at her ceiling, Alexander's taste still on her lips and her future suddenly uncertain. Chapter 8. The Ultimatum. The confrontation came from Margaret, Alexander's longtime assistant, who requested a private meeting with Maya in the corporate offices. The older woman's expression was grave as she gestured for Maya to sit. "I've been with Mr. Hayes for 15 years. I've seen him through hostile takeovers, family scandals, and now this accident. But I've never seen him as vulnerable as he is right now." Maya felt her stomach tighten, sensing where this was heading. "He's falling for you, Ms. Chen, and while I can't fault his taste, I question your timing." The accusation stung because it carried truth. Maya had noticed how Alexander looked at her differently now, how their professional interactions had become charged with unspoken tension. Alexander Hayes has enemies who would love nothing more than to see him brought down by personal scandal. A relationship with his caregiver would provide exactly the ammunition they need. Margaret wasn't finished. More importantly, he needs to focus on rebuilding his confidence and his company. He can't afford distractions right now, no matter how pleasant. The ultimatum was delivered with surgical precision. Maintain professional boundaries or find another position. Margaret made it clear that Maya's employment hung in the balance, and with it, her ability to pay for her brother's medical care. That evening, Maya watched Alexander from across the room during dinner, memorizing the way he moved, the sound of his laugh, the intensity when he looked at her. Tomorrow, she would have to rebuild the walls between them, and the thought made her heart ache. Chapter 9. Walls rebuilt. The change in Maya's behavior was immediate and devastating. Where before she had been warm and engaging, now she was coolly professional. Where before she had lingered in conversations, now she completed tasks efficiently and disappeared. Alexander noticed immediately, and the shift left him confused and hurt. Had he misread the signals? Had their kiss meant nothing to her? The questions tormented him as he watched her move through his home like a polite stranger. He tried to bridge the gap during their morning routine, asking about her brother's health and weekend plans. Maya's responses were cordial but distant, offering no opening for deeper connection. The music room, where they'd shared intimate conversations, remained silent. The worst part was seeing sadness in her eyes, as if the professional distance caused her pain too. Alexander began to suspect something else was driving her withdrawal, but Maya deflected his attempts to understand what had changed. His work suffered as concentration fragmented. Board meetings became exercises in going through motions, while his mind wandered to the woman who moved through his peripheral vision like a ghost of what might have been. 3 weeks into Maya's new coldness, Alexander reached his breaking point. He cornered her in the kitchen one evening, his wheelchair blocking her path. "What happened? What did I do wrong?" Maya's carefully constructed mask slipped for just a moment, and he saw genuine anguish beneath her professional facade. "You did nothing wrong," she whispered, and the pain in her voice nearly broke his heart. But before he could press further, she had composed herself and slipped past him, leaving Alexander alone with his questions. Chapter 10. The Breaking Point. "I don't need your pity," Maya said, her voice sharp with defensive anger. She'd found Alexander in his study, staring at a medical journal with such defeated hopelessness that she'd momentarily forgotten her resolve to maintain distance. Her offer to help had been instinctive, born from caring, but Alexander's response revealed how much her withdrawal had wounded him. "Is that what you think this is?" Alexander's voice was dangerously quiet as he looked up at her. "Pity." The billionaire in the wheelchair wasn't ready for that assumption, and Maya realized she'd made a terrible mistake. The hurt in his gray eyes was raw and immediate, cutting through her defensive walls like paper. "Every morning you look at me like I'm broken. Every interaction feels like you're performing a duty rather than wanting to be here. If that's not pity, what would you call it?" Maya felt her carefully constructed barriers crumbling. 3 weeks of forcing professional distance had been agony, but seeing the pain she'd caused him was worse. She opened her mouth to explain about Margaret's ultimatum and her impossible position, but words stuck in her throat. "I see," Alexander said when her silence stretched too long. "Margaret was right then. You can't handle being around someone like me." The assumption was so wrong, it took Maya's breath away. She'd pulled back not because she couldn't handle his disability, but because she cared too much, because the connection between them had become precious enough that losing her job seemed a small price to pay for protecting it. But before she could find her voice, Alexander was moving past her toward the door. "Your services are no longer required, Ms. Chen. Margaret will arrange your final payment and references." Chapter 11. Revelations. Maya's dismissal became the catalyst for everything that followed. Within hours, she was in Margaret's office, no longer caring about professional consequences or her brother's medical bills. The pain of seeing Alexander's heartbreak had given her courage to fight. "You threatened my job. You made me choose between caring for him and keeping my position." Margaret's expression remained carefully neutral, but Maya caught a flicker of guilt. "I did what I thought was best for Mr. Hayes." "No, you did what was easiest. Instead of trusting Alexander to make his own choices, you manipulated both of us." The confrontation that followed was intense and revealing. Margaret admitted to concerns about scandal and distraction, but as Maya pressed deeper, other motivations emerged. The assistant had been Alexander's closest confidant for 15 years, and the introduction of another woman into his inner circle had threatened her position of trust. "He was healing," Maya said, her voice rising with passionate certainty. "For the first time since his accident, he was looking forward instead of backward. And you destroyed that because you were afraid of losing influence." Margaret's facade finally cracked, revealing the insecurity beneath her professional competence. She'd watched Alexander's dependency on her decrease as his connection with Maya grew, and fear had driven her to sabotage something that might have saved them both. The revelation came too late for easy repairs. Alexander had already retreated behind walls that might be impossible to breach again, but Maya finally understood that her choice to step back had been based on manipulation rather than necessity, and that knowledge gave her strength to fight for what they'd lost. Chapter 12. The Grand Gesture. Alexander's surprise at seeing Maya at the Hayes Industries shareholders meeting was evident even from across the crowded auditorium. She'd used her temporary security clearance to gain access, knowing this might be her only chance to reach him before his walls became permanently insurmountable. The meeting was crucial for Alexander's future as CEO. The board's confidence had been shaken by months of declining stock prices and questions about his leadership capability. Maya watched from the back as he presented his vision for the company's future, his voice strong and compelling despite the personal turmoil she knew he was carrying. When the formal presentation ended and the question period began, Gregory Walsh made his predictable move, questioning Alexander's long-term viability as a leader. The attack was carefully worded, but unmistakably hostile. That's when Maya stood up. "If I may, I'd like to address Mr. Walsh's concerns from a unique perspective." Security moved to escort her out, but Alexander raised a hand to stop them, curiosity overriding his anger at her presence. Maya walked down the aisle toward the front, every eye following her movement. When she reached the microphone, she turned to face the assembly with calm determination. "My name is Maya Chen, and until recently, I was Mr. Hayes's personal care coordinator. I've had the privilege of witnessing his adaptation to new circumstances, and I can tell you that his strength, intelligence, and leadership abilities have never been more evident." She spoke about his rigorous daily schedule, his innovative approaches to accessibility in corporate design, his deeper understanding of the human challenges his company's medical technologies addressed. Most importantly, she spoke about his character, his refusal to accept limitations, and his commitment to proving that strength comes in many forms. The room listened in rapt attention as Maya systematically dismantled every argument against Alexander's continued leadership. Chapter 13. Unbroken Hearts. The vote of confidence was unanimous. Alexander retained his position as CEO with stronger support than he'd enjoyed before the accident. But as the shareholders filed out, his attention was focused entirely on the woman who'd just risked everything to defend him. Maya waited by the podium as he approached, her heart hammering with uncertainty. She'd laid her feelings bare in front of hundreds of people, but Alexander's expression was unreadable as his wheelchair came to a stop in front of her. "That was quite a speech," he said quietly. It was true, every word. They looked at each other across the space that separated them, both aware that this moment would define everything that came next. Maya had chosen to fight for him publicly, but Alexander still carried the wounds of her earlier withdrawal. "Why?" he asked simply. Maya took a breath, knowing that her answer would either rebuild the bridge between them or destroy it completely. "Because I love you. Not your money, not your success, not your tragedy. You. The man who plays piano at 2 a.m. and fights for respect he shouldn't have to earn. The man who's teaching me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's loving someone enough to be vulnerable with them." Alexander's carefully maintained composure finally cracked, and Maya saw everything she'd hoped for reflected in his eyes. Love, forgiveness, and the possibility of a future neither had dared to imagine. "I love you too," he said, reaching for her hand. "I have since that first night you found me playing piano. I just didn't know if you could love someone like me." Maya knelt beside his wheelchair, bringing them to eye level, and cupped his face in her hands. Someone like you? You mean someone brilliant and stubborn and impossibly difficult to work for? Someone who's shown me that the heart doesn't break, it just learns to love more deeply? Their kiss was witnessed by the maintenance staff cleaning up after the meeting, but neither Maya nor Alexander cared. They'd found their way back to each other through manipulation, misunderstanding, and fear, and their love was stronger for having survived the testing. 6 months later, Maya walked down the aisle wearing her grandmother's wedding dress and the smile of a woman who'd learned that the best love stories aren't about perfect people. They're about people who choose to be perfectly imperfect together. Alexander waited for her at the altar in his custom wheelchair, wearing a tuxedo and an expression of wonder that she was actually going to be his wife. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was a promise that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as partners. Their love story became legend in business circles, not because it was perfect, but because it proved that the most valuable things in life can't be bought. They can only be built through courage, honesty, and the willingness to love someone exactly as they are. Thank you for joining us on Maya and Alexander's journey from professional boundaries to unbreakable love. Their story reminds us that true strength comes not from never falling, but from choosing to rise together. We'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Tell us where you're listening from and what touched your heart most about their story. Your support means the world to us, and knowing that these tales of love and resilience reach people across the globe makes every word worth writing. Until our next story, remember that love always finds a way.